Hello and welcome to GATSBY Fridays, a show about getting the best out of a creative life from two creative directors working around the world and based in New York City.
I'm your host, Alex Jamilio.
And I'm Sarah Semi.
Today we talk about how the immigrant experience has shaped our perspective in the creative space.
We talk about belonging and what home means living in a country you weren't born in.
And at the end of each episode, we make a signature cocktail to toast cheers to you.
So hang with us as we talk about immigration and belonging.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Sarah. And this is GATSBY Fridays.
Sarah, before we get into our conversation, let's do a check-in. How are you? And what are you wearing?
I'm good. I feel a little intimidated about the subject matter we're about to discuss. So we took our time today to get to recording because it feels very close to me. So it's a little bit of anxiety there, but otherwise it's been a productive day. You know, life, there's always challenges that come your way, but then you just get through and, I don't know, prosper. What is that? The saying?
Live long and prosper.
Yeah, so.
You're not a Trekkie. Okay.
Like, I don't know. We're getting through it. I'm so not a Trekkie. I wasn't even here in the country while that was happening, coming back to the main topic.
I'm not a Trekkie, and I even know that.
I wasn't even in this country when that was a thing, so clearly. But I just like the idea that, like, you know, you just kind of prosper. Like, you fight through, you get there. That's the kind of day that we had today. I'm wearing my winter uniform that I've invested in at the beginning of the season. My fake leather appearing carbon 38 leggings.
They're still working. That's the point.
Oh, I have another pair that's similar to this, a different kind of theme, but similar fake leather looking.
You swapped them out?
No, this is the new one.
Oh, okay.
That's all I'm going to wear for the rest of the year until it gets warm again. And the warm light gray sweater because winter uniform. Like in the summer, I get I get excited about like wearing dresses and like it's shorts or pants and a tank or something. I'm just like, no, it's cold. I need leggings and a warm sweater.
If I were to make a T-shirt with your face on it as a if you were a graphic that I needed to distill into shapes, it would be a big bulky sweater and leggings.
Yeah, pretty much.
and
like
leggings.
light gray top and skinny black leggings because that's only. Yeah.
That is perfect.
So how are you doing? What are you wearing?
Well, I'm happy. The big news today is that the Electoral College has confirmed that Joe Biden is in fact the president-elect. Just wanted to get that. I didn't want to get political. I just want that to be on the record.
It took how long?
So people know.
Yeah.
I knew. So I just wanted to make sure everybody else knew.
Yeah.
So I am happy. I am ecstatic actually about that. It's about time. Let's just keep on moving forward.
I mean, we'll come back to that eventually in this conversation about the premise of the United States and the whole, like, the fact that course correction, the possibilities of making mistakes is human, but then coming back and correcting them and doing better is like the administration that's going to come in is going to be so much better. It's going to, like, I don't expect that it's going to fix everything, but we're going to come back to this idea of why the United States and why the immigration here is like something that I've tried, and we're going to talk about it. But I think it comes in the light of that, and I think it's very appropriate to celebrate it.
There's finally a little bit of a clearing in the fog. I am wearing a varsity sweater with paint splatter on it, and this is not paint splatter that I put on it.
This is varsity sweater, really? I thought it's a cable knit, meaning like really nerdy, like.
Well, varsity I think is like this kind of like stitching like this.
I mean, you're the fashion expert.
So I call it a varsity sweater. It could be referred to as something else. But it has fake paint splatter, which is kind of funny because
I like that. That kind of just makes it less nerdy.
Exactly. That was the hope. I don't know if I'd wear this again though.
Why?
I don't feel like it's me.
It's a little baggier than
It's a little baggier than I wear my clothes. Stonewashed jeans and my Van sneakers because I still.
How'd you end up wearing it today then?
Well, I wanted something that reflected art.
Oh, okay.
And so I thought, let me wear this because I had paint splatter that I did not put on myself. Go figure. Forever the fashionista. and checkered Vans. So
Classic.
I feel good in my outfit. Yeah.
Great.
Sarah, art and design is a big theme in your life. What did you want to explore in terms of art as a creative living when you came to this country?
Well, I came here, I was very young. I was old enough to know where I came from. I was 18, and I had been in the U.S. for, when I was 13 and 15 for summer schools as ESL student. I knew that I wanted to be here, well, culturally, in terms of, we all grew up in the 80s and 90s with movies and everybody, like, just this whole American dream being extremely, like, I don't know, calling as a young person, but from an art and design perspective, growing up in Turkey, and this only goes back to my personal experience from 20 years ago. I went to a very highly esteemed, excellent private high school that was in the American style of teaching. There's a lot of different types of schools in Istanbul that are redeemed, that private high schools that are redeemed to be better education than the government institutions. In Austrian, German, Italian, French. I went to an American high school. And my parents knew that in who I was as a child, needed the type of education that's going to let me explore what I'm interested in instead of being indoctrinated of what the curriculum called for. Even with that, at that time, art wasn't a focus in the education. I always wanted to do more with paints and art. I had 1 hour of art class, or maybe 2 hours tops per week. And there was no art history when we were in high school, and it's one of the best schools in the country. And we were offered, it's kind of like AP in the U.S., where it's called IB. It's International Baccalaureate. It's
Advanced placement.
It's advanced placement kind of training where you volunteer for it, you pay for it, and by the time you graduate, you get an additional certificate that says you completed college level courses. And coming from a foreign country, when you apply to U.S. colleges, that comes highly esteemed, because then you're like, okay, this comes from a high school in Turkey, but they've completed this like internationally accepted level of education out of a high school.
Did you get college credit for that?
I could have if any of that was relevant to what I wanted to study. So there was two routes. The choice of not taking that meant that you chose the easier route. You didn't choose the more challenging route, and it did not. We were told it did not look good to American universities if you wanted to go abroad. So it was either business administration or engineering. I'm like, I'm not interested in either one of those. I want to go into the arts and creatives.
Yes.
That path was not open. But this again, I know that the curriculums have evolved over the 20 years that I have been in high school then, but I did not get the freedom to explore art the way I wanted to when I was younger enough to figure out what my path should have been. So I always feel like I was a little delayed because of that in exploring my personal expression. Like, as soon as I graduated from college and I lived in New York City, I cut my hair really short and I dyed it like Ferrari red. People do that when they're younger. I did not need to be doing that at 23, but I didn't get it out of my system when I was younger because I did not get to do that when I was in high school and in college. I was just trying to figure out like how to study. Like I didn't have time to explore personal expressions. I was really worried about keeping scholarships and like getting the best out of college kind of like, so 23 out of college, first job, I'm like, well, let's dye my hair red. Like that kind of like creative expression was not available to me at the time 20 years ago when I was growing up. So the premise of the United States was the same way the American system high school fitted my personality in terms of like what I wanted to explore outside of school, what I wanted to do, join a club. There were options of clubs. It wasn't like I wasn't told what to do, which works well with my personality. My parents were very smart and knowing who I am to just really try hard to get me into that school. So I knew that I wanted to be here. And from that perspective, as soon as I chose, it was between Bard College in upstate New York or Tulane. Tulane gave me a better scholarship. And Tulane was an incredible place because New Orleans is so eclectic and artistic. I had incredible, actually practicing artists teaching me in college. but also I didn't know, I wasn't aware even to understand what type of art programs were involved, but it was very fine arts rooted, which has completely impacted my career to this day. And I've talked about this before, printmaking and really getting your hands dirty with your creative expression. And I was never the gifted person who sat down and drew an impeccable portrait of you with a pencil. I have a different way of expressing visually, but I was always in this need to be visually expressive. So coming here allowed me to express, like, to explore all of that, find my path. If I stayed, I'm sure I would have found some sort of creative path, because if it's your calling, you find your way. You know, there's a saying, it's a Turkish saying, like, water will find its way through the cracks in the rocks. Like, it will find its way.
Yes.
You will come out. Like, if the creative thing is your calling, you will figure it out.
And it was New York, not like...
I started in New Orleans, Turkey, right?
Well, it was America and not
America
Paris
in terms of an educational
London.
system. Yes. My parents, both of them went to European high schools in Istanbul. Yeah. My dad, French, my mom, Austrian. And the European system is a little more strict. And they were taught by, well, in French, frères, and in the Austrian high school with nuns. So it was very strict and driven by a missionary service kind of thing. So it's like in a Muslim country, they went to high schools that were driven by the church and people who devoted themselves to a missionary life. So even though the education is exceptional, the structure and the way that the teaching is like right now the most popular. I don't have kids. I'm sure you understand this more, but there's different types of education, right? Montessori is the most popular one. But so that type of, like, it wasn't for my generation 20 years ago in Turkey. My parents knew that I wouldn't thrive in a European system. So going to an American system they tried extra hard to get me into one of those. I would have ended up in I think I got into the German high school. But my parents knew that I belonged in an American system. So there was a lot of, like, long story short, they got me into it. So from that perspective, I had no interest in coming to Europe. Like, I went to an American system. All my teachers were American. From English to science to math, we studied everything in English, but not British English. There was no British influence, so London was never relevant. And my teachers were American. So I don't know, like, Europe was never a thing because my second language was English.
Okay.
And London was never a thing because it just didn't seem relevant at the time, especially in the 90s. America seemed more attractive, I guess. I don't know. I can't really explain that part of it. I don't have a recollection of it.
I have just an affinity for London in the 90s. I just wanted to mention that. I would have loved to study in London during the 90s. The music, the fashion.
But again, we have an age difference, right? So we match most of the eras culturally, but there's that one little tip of thing, like when you say, I would have loved to study, like in the 90s, you were of age to be studying independently as a grown, almost like a young adult there. But in the 90s, I was 10 in 1990. So, like, you know, that age difference, when you're that young, those very few years make that much of a big difference. But anyway, so America has always been, the U.S. has been the place to be. And studying here in a college where if I stayed in Turkey, I take a 3-hour exam. That means that I passed. And then I take another 3-hour exam that puts me in a program that I qualified against the entire population. I don't get to choose my major. I don't get to choose what I'm going to study. If my points out of 6 hours of my entire existence hit psychology over art, I get stuck with psychology as my college education for the rest of my life. I don't get to study art. And the only arts education was you had to apply, but you had to be, like, incredibly gifted with a portfolio. I was never that kid. I needed to figure this out because my creative spirit comes not only from my visual sensibilities, but also from absorbing culture around me. I have built that over time. I wasn't as gifted. In college, I struggled a lot with composition and a lot of things. Like, I go back and I see why I didn't get certain grades, even though I got so into details of certain things. I can see that now, and I learned it over time. I was there to learn. I was at the age to not be ready to be like accoladed. I was ready to learn. So the American system allows you to explore your path and find the right fit for yourself because it doesn't force you into certain molds.
And to make sure that you explore all avenues, not just the avenue that was predetermined for you necessarily.
Yes. So I was very lucky to be at Tulane University, which also has a architectural school. And I always felt like maybe I was interested in architecture because it's a creative thing, but it's a more solid occupation. I thought that I felt fondly off of it, but I didn't know. And they offered a minor. A minor meaning like a minor, you had to take like 6 classes or 1 studio and 4 classes. And I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this right. So I took the studio class along with all the entry-level architecture students. Let me tell you, I learned very quickly that I did not want to be an architect. But I also learned so many valuable lessons from that one semester that I still think about today, about how to think about space, how to think about full-on experiences in just one semester. And it was one of the hardest things I've done in college. No one forced me to. I was just like, well, if I'm going to take this minor, I'm going to do it, right? I just don't want to take lecture classes. I want to be in the studio with these guys. But that's what the American system allows you to do. I got to experiment I got to dabble in an architectural program. I got it out of my system to know that of course I can learn. There's so much I can understand and appreciate, but it's not for me. Like, you don't get to do that you don't get to do that in Turkey at all. Like, I would have had to be I would have studied psychology now with a degree that I have nothing to do with because I'm not interested in that path at all. So coming to the U.S. for me was getting a better education and being able to have the flexibility to carve out my own path. And that I knew that was a creatively driven path. I just didn't know where it would lead because I didn't have enough experience in high school to express myself or explore arts or even learn about art history. All I wanted to do, like, first semester, I remember, like, sitting in my mom's summer house and, like, trying to pick classes from the printed, like, newsprint catalog they sent me. And I was like, I had to be on the phone with the Tulane operating system on and there's no internet. Like, this is August 1998.
You got to call them.
Even if there was internet, there was no internet in southern Turkey then. There's barely any. So I remember, it had to be done over the phone. And I remember thinking, like, all I want is art and art history classes. And if I get these enough, then I will know what kind of major I will pick at the end of the 2 years. The fact that a liberal arts program is a possibility that you take 2 years to really explore your interests, to finalize that was my immigration. That was my American dream. What brought me here was this promise of a better education that I would get to explore before paving my own path, right? But you're first generation American. Your mom immigrated here from Honduras. Her experience has been completely different. And do you think her decision to raise her children in the U.S. impacted your creative life?
I think my mom knew early on that I was a creative, drawing and doing.
Yeah, but you were born here. You were already
born. I was born here, but I feel like she obviously didn't come to this country knowing that I was going to be a creative because I was born here. Once I was here, she had to... Art wasn't a thing in my family that was recognized as being a viable...
way to make a living.
Job pursuit or career endeavor. But she knew that I was somebody who wanted to draw, and it was also a thing to keep me safe, to keep me at home, to keep me off the streets, so to speak. And so she invested. She invested in a drawing table. She invested in art materials. I went to a public school in New York City, and art education wasn't the best and it was lacking. So she made arrangements for me to take extracurricular art classes that really propelled me not only into understanding art, but also understanding other people, because I was able to meet other kids
expanded your circle
in other aspects and genres of life. Just like when you came here and you started understanding a broader swath of not only the American psyche and the American personality, but also just personalities in general, was the same thing that I had to do, even living in New York City.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's just growing up and understanding the world. That in a previous episode, that you had to, because of the public school curriculum, you ended up taking these private classes, and that led to Pratt and Parsons and SVA. And I guess the difference is, what I'm asking is, as a first generation American, when you're exploring this creative life, did you feel like you belonged? Did you feel like your path was in front of you if you wanted to explore it? You belonged in a creative community. There was some place you were going for, or were you just like winging it?
Speaking from the immigrant experience and my mom being an immigrant, and also coming from an ideology that you came to this country to work hard and to earn a living, and art wasn't in the equation. Like, art is not something that I grew up with that was a viable means of getting out of the circumstances or the situation that I was currently in. I have to give credit to my mom and my aunt for really seeing that here's a child who was precocious and really wanted to draw, and we needed to find an avenue for him. And I think it's just not the way my mother and in her culture and the way she grew up.
I think maybe it's the generation too. Like I grew
also
up,
generational.
I grew up with the same expectations. There's always stories around that revolve around my parents, but I think my parents knew that I needed to find a creative way to make a living out of my creative talents and expectations. They could see their kid had something, but they weren't trying to make. If I said I was going to be a painter, they would be like worried. They weren't like, yes, she's a painter. It wasn't, and again, like, that's the expectation though. At that age, at that generation, at that era, if you wanted to be a creative, other than this like a madman scenario, which is like very unique and rare, making a living out of a creative profession was really not understood as common as it is now. So I think we both got lucky with people that let us an open avenue for us and our families, that they saw we needed to just go and figure it out. And we just needed the tools to be presented to us.
Did you have other members in your family or other members in your community that were artists that you could look towards in your community growing up in Turkey?
Not in terms of career.
No.
My grandmother on my dad's side was a wealthy wife, so that was her hobby. She kept busy. She was part of the Japanese Turkish Association, Women's Association, and she would go teach like crafts lessons there. But like, it was just to keep her like socially engaged. It wasn't anything artistically wild. It was more craftsy what she did. Like, the first time I did like glass piece mosaics was with her, and then and actually more influentially on my mom's dad, my grandfather on my mom's side. I think he was an artist at heart. I think generationally he never thought that being an artist was the path that he could have taken, which I think I still think about that very fondly. I always wonder, like, if he was born in this country, what would he be? Because generationally he was a kid when the Turkish Republic was founded. There was like this whole like drive, like at that era, and he became a military man, so he was a lot more structured and rigid in certain ways, but he was a painter, he was a musician, he was an artist at heart, and he got into calligraphy, which is a very, very Muslim art form, because the depictions of Muhammad is prohibited in Muslim culture. So anything that was there, they made miniature art forms, meaning people were depicted like as tiny things, so it was no longer a depiction of any particular person. They were so tiny that you couldn't really make resemblance of it. Calligraphy evolved because they couldn't make impressions of the face, because they didn't want the same way the Christ is idolized as a face. So the letter form evolved. So calligraphy became a huge art form, and he became a calligraphist, which is the one tattoo that I have on my wrist. Is his artwork. So he was an inspirational artist, but again, that wasn't his primary way to make a living. That's what he did when he retired from his military and civil duties. Like, he would have never even considered Like become like artists. Being an artist is never a full-time job, and that's a very rare. And you had to be exceptionally talented as a kid for any family or social expectance to support you through that. So culturally, in that era, was not okay. It's different now.
So
We are more open.
it was important for you to come here to study art and also
Find a path.
find a path and explore opportunities.
Yeah. So what brought me here was the opportunities, and I recognize that it's in the current political climate. I came here from a privileged perspective. I came here as a college student to a private university, and I got to stay, which I worked really hard, not to take away from the work that I've done, and I came here as a scholarship student. I couldn't afford it without scholarships, but my immigrant experience is about finding my place in the world. And finding my place in the world, I come to the United States because the educational system was more promising to let me figure out my path, which I think is still true. But also, I went to college in New Orleans.
Yes.
So from an art perspective, it's a very eclectic art community, but also very artist, which is not who I am. It's not my personality to be that eclectic. There's still
very whimsy fine arts.
Yes, very whimsy fine arts. And I went to a fine arts program. That's what Tulane has, but that gave me a wonderful groundwork to build from. And I learned, like, I wouldn't take away that experience because sometimes, life puts you in certain paths that it isn't exactly what you wanted, but you benefit from in the greater perspective, which I absolutely believe in that in this case. But I knew, like, I came to New York for Thanksgiving, my junior year, and then I knew I had to be here.
Wow.
I had to be here. I can't tell, like, I didn't even explore the city that much. I was my friend's guest, so I followed them around. But I did my first internship, which is where I met you. And that company already changed my perspective about all I knew about a creative way to make a living without being a broke artist was in advertising. I didn't love advertising. I just thought that was the only way to at least be in the creative vicinity while still making a living. And then I found a company that does brand positioning. Hallelujah. What is that? Like, we actually define the brand itself. So it becomes... So New York already, as soon as I got here, gave me so much more to explore.
What did you see in New York that really captured your imagination? Like, what streets did you walk down, or what? And I don't want to know what built
Again, it wasn't an experience that's memorable enough to say like this is what changed my mind. I didn't get to see museums or anything. I was my friend's guest. I was just on the streets, just walking around the city. I can't even describe it because it was God knows how many years ago. It was
the streets will have that effect.
It did. I guess maybe that's the effect.
Yes.
I can't really put my finger on it. I was a guest, so there were already plans in the works. But for the first time since I left home, I felt like I was in a live city. So Istanbul, as much as it's now considered, I don't know, that's the bridge between Europe and the Middle East, but it is a metropolitan city. And you raise your hand and cab stops. And then I go to New Orleans, which is suburban in a way, and it's homes and swamps and it's sticky weather and tropical storms, and you have to call a cab and wait 40 minutes for it to show up for you. Like, it was just like a very culturally, like, this is America? What is this? But I went to New Orleans. I had a lot of friends that went to Boston, which is kind of like a small town that protects you from, like, that kind of gives you the sense of enough of a city. But then you come to New York. New York is something else.
Yes.
So coming here, I don't want to presume that I came to this country and say, okay, I came to the U.S., I belong here. I always knew that there was more to be promised to me here, that I could do more. I felt like I could kind of get the sense that if I stayed in Turkey, there would be a lot more limitations in where I could pivot to or I would carve a path. But then you come to New York, and that's I feel like New York is its own thing, creates an incredible amount of possibilities, but it also gives me that sense of belonging here, that I can be as foreign as I want to be. I can be as different as I am. But New York is a home to every person that wants to make it home. It is, I mean, in the current political climate, there's a lot more highlight on how different isn't accepted and how difficult it is. And I read a lot of books about, the latest one I read is The Conditional Citizen, where even when you get your green card and your citizenship, if you're not a born white American, it comes with conditions of it comes with conditions of the quality of your life. And I can see that. I understand all of that. But from a creative life, New York thrives on you being different.
Contrast.
And embraces it. So there's a difference in my immigrant experience in that I don't pretend to assume to understand anybody else's immigration experience and the struggles, and I don't want to focus on the bureaucracy of the paperwork, but for me, the acceptance is because it's New York. New York embraces your uniqueness. Did you see that episode of Oprah's show on Apple when she had Obama
yes.
as the guest? I showed you a little clip
where
they were
hilarious.
With the green screen. That was really cool. But and I've heard him say that before too, where he says he named his book The Promised Land of kind of the similar emotional attachment to this country, where he says my story is only possible in this country of a white mother from Kansas and a black father from Africa that can create me to become the president of the United States. And it is only possible in this country, despite its challenges. And I love that explanation of the possibilities of this country. So for me, the immigration story, I've written about it before, has challenges, and belonging is a very personal thing. There are challenges. There are moments that are very lonely. There are moments where I feel like, what am I doing? But in terms of the things that I've accomplished, I don't think my story would be possible anywhere else. We talked a lot about me and why I chose to live in this country, because I chose to live somewhere else than I was born, versus you were born here.
Yes.
So you were already in New York. Why would you go anywhere else, right? New York or nowhere. That's just kind of I don't want to keep harping on that. But there's also cultural things that we carry through from your heritage, from my heritage. I have taken you and your wife to a Turkish restaurant once, about 10 years ago, because you both were we want to eat Turkish food. Where do we go? And there's plenty of places in the city that I have my preferences. I'm very picky. There's also really terrible places in the city too. But also from your perspective, your mom came here, and the food and music are usually what we carry and what we hold close to our hearts when we no longer live where we know and we're familiar with, right? So what can you tell about growing up in a home as first generation American? Your first language ends up being American, but you're in a bilingual home. Music, food. How did you carry that through? How did you find your identity as different than your mom?
So in my household, we spoke Spanish at home, but because of the generation that I grew up in, so my mom spoke in Spanish and we responded back in English.
That's interesting.
But extending that culturally outside of the home, once again, I go out into the world, and New York, yes, I was born here, all this opportunity was here, but I was not aware of it until I became of age to start really traveling around the city on my own.
Of course.
And
you were a kid.
I was a kid, going to the East Village, going to the village and seeing all the art, the different characters and personalities that you can run into and bump into, and not to feel nostalgic about that time in New York during the early mid late 90s. But that was a very special time, not without its violence and cultural strifes. But it was good. It was good. And New York gave me the opportunity to really see a broad swath of people and a broad swath of creative outlets. It wasn't just looking at the people was one thing, but also looking at the music that was coming out of New York during the time, during the 90s and the late 80s. But that's the thing. Like the music and the food that was at home, I feel like gave me the base. Just like here you are in New York, and your Turkish interior is still with you, even though you travel through the world and through this country as you, as your individual self,
Yeah.
as Sarah, the traveler, Sarah, the explorer, Sarah, the thinker. It's the same thing. Like, I still carry a lot of my own cultural heritage with me, but I am still Alex the thinker who goes out and carries his heritage and thinks beyond that
Of
and
course.
expands on that.
How does that heritage reflect on your aesthetic or your choices?
I always want to draw back on my cultural heritage to kind of move me forward. Colors, rhythms, and shapes always play into just the background of my thinking. And that's something I would like to explore more over time. I have an uncle who is a painter, and he paints in vibrant colors, and he paints a lot of cultural scenes. And every time I think of my graphic identity now and how I love bright shapes and colors, all that extends from my cultural roots, from his teaching me how to paint in the 80s while I was in Honduras with him, sitting over his easel and filling in big strokes of color. And a lot of that plays into my aesthetic now.
So even when we're young, when we don't really recognize the impact of our surroundings immediately, and obviously at that age, no one really thinks in depth about any of that. This many years later, you and I both pull back from our earliest interactions with creativity and art, and that means culturally from our background.
Sarah, my last question to you. What is home?
What is home to me? Home is it's so many things. I don't think it's one definition. It makes me think of that podcast. One of the very few that I have sent you. You always send me more. Krista Tippett's conversation with Richard Blanco, this Cuban immigrant who was a civil engineer that became a poet, and he read his poetry in the White House and stuff. And he got to do that because he really reflects this immigrant experience and belonging and cultural clashes of being Cuban and celebrating Thanksgiving and the turkey versus the pork, how the rest of the family responds to it, the elders. And there's a lot of and then he goes, what is home? It's like asking what love is. What is that? It's such there's no explanation. It's not one definition. For me, home is is it where you put your head to sleep, or is it the shelter you keep over your head, or where I belong? I came here when I was 18. I'm 40 years old now. I grew up here in a way, in a sense of that I had my formative adult years. I have lived in this country longer than I have lived in Turkey. I was born there. My family is there, meaning my parents and, my mom and dad. And I only have one cousin and her parents. And that's my extended family, and then you have, the people you call family.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a huge family to begin with. So home it's not home there. I haven't been there. I haven't lived there since I was 18. So I don't know where my home is. Home is hard to define for me. Home is where I feel like I belong, which is New York.
Yes.
That not necessarily every part of the U.S., but here, I've also built all my friendships here. I have friends here that I've established since I was 18, since I've gotten here. That, so that I don't know where home is. And I think that's the definition in almost where, what couple weeks out from 2021, is that I think the question is, where do you feel like you belong? It's more than what's home, because where you feel like you belong is where you can make your home. I think good. I have to spin it that way, because I think in this day and age, with all the political, immigration, refugee, all of these conversations, the same way that we said race is social construct, also borders are political constructs. So the immigration is less about if I'm allowed in this country or not, more about where I belong. So home is New York.
I wonder about that. I actually wonder if I can make home somewhere else. I have an affinity for Asia. I hoped one day that home would be Tokyo, or home would be Shanghai, or home would be Singapore.
Life had different plans.
Life had different plans for me, but who knows? I mean, life is still wide and open.
See, I think maybe the concept of home is fluid, where you belong and where you make home. And now for our favorite part of this and every episode, our signature cocktail. Alex, what do you have for us today?
So I was thinking about flavors, and I was thinking about our conversation earlier and about country and roots. And what I thought would be the best thing to do, pull flavors from my mother's Honduran and my Honduran culture, and that is the tamarindo fruit. What we wanted to do today was to create a dark and stormy. And I love this drink, and I love that we made this drink while we were listening to music.
Oh, yes.
We were listening to Andy Palacio, who has since passed away, who is a Garifuna singer and musician. And let's get into the drink. So for our drink today, it's a tamarindo dark and stormy, and that consists of 2 parts dark rum, 2 parts tamarindo soda, and 2 parts ginger beer. You fill a Collins glass with ice, you place sliced lime on the inside as a decoration, and you pour all the contents into a glass, and you finish off with a garnish of a sliced lime wheel, and you enjoy.
It was really good.
We had a couple of them.
We had a couple of them. That was very good. And the music was lovely. Coming back to the music conversation, how often do you listen to music from Honduras or like
good
roots?
One.
You know, like
because I want to ask you that too.
Oh yeah, that's my dark deep secret. That's my dark deep secret.
I unfortunately don't listen to it as much as I would like to. And you know what? I take that back. That's not even an excuse. You listen to music when you feel the mood to and the desire to listen to music. So that's that. It was nice. I'm going to say this. It was nice for us to listen to music while we were preparing this episode, while we were preparing this drink.
I really appreciated also learning about this music and the history of it and the heritage of it and what it means to you. It was a very new experience for us to explore music.
And it was nice to have music around.
Well, it was nice to your music of your heritage. I've never heard you talk about this before, ever. Yeah. It was very new and refreshing, and you brought it up, and I loved it.
I thought it was wonderful. I wanted to ask you, when do you have the opportunity to listen to Turkish music?
Dude, that's something I do in the privacy of my own apartment. Mm-hmm. It's not something that anybody else listens. There was a moment last fall at Barrio Chino on the Lower East Side at the one of my favorite Mexican restaurants in the city.
I've been there.
It's so good. That all of a sudden this one song broke out of this one artist, Barış Manço, any Turkish people listening out there, and I'm surrounded by a bunch of friends that I've known for a very long time, and I look around and I'm like, there's not a single person that understands the joy that I feel when I hear this music in the middle of Lower East Side in a Mexican restaurant, and it's Turkish rock from like the late 70s, and I'm like, oh my god. And they're looking at me like, what? I'm like, but you don't understand. So,
did it break your heart?
No, it doesn't matter. The fact that I heard it like, and growing up, like I didn't grow up with listening to Turkish pop as much in the house. So like, my friends always seem to be surprised, but music is a big connection to my heritage. It's not something that I share publicly as much because they don't really know the songs. It doesn't mean the same way to them. That's why I was so excited when you shared the music today, which is something we've never done before, even though we talk a lot about stuff.
Well, it came out in this episode because I thought it was apt.
It was very appropriate, this episode, but I understand the music is a huge tie to emotions about
one's culture.
What's this culture that I may not live it every day, but, you know, I listen to it on my own a lot more than I probably realize.
And when I listen to it, it definitely stirs something in me that brings me back. And I can't quite define what the quote-unquote bringing back is. It's warm and it centers me.
Yes. It's not something that's bringing back that you're, like, longing something that you're lacking now.
No.
It's a very fond feeling. And there's something about, like, you know, thank you, quarantine. I do a lot of like solo singing parties in my apartment now because otherwise I'll go crazy. But like, just there's something about singing out loud in Turkish that I only talk Turkish to my mom and dad when I call them on the phone. It's not something that I do daily. So that also just like changes things. The music is a very primal connection. And I think that's how we carry. I think I carry it surprisingly through more with music than I do with food.
We'll have a link in our Instagram and our website for the music of Andy Palacio.
Thank you for hanging with us. For a list of the resources mentioned in this episode, hop onto our site, GATSBYFridays.com.
You can find the Tamarindo Dark and Stormy recipe on our site, GATSBYFridays.com.
For show notes, or if you want to leave a comment, suggest a show topic, get at us on our site.
Don't forget to rate us, give us 5 stars, write a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps to get us in front of more ears and build our audience. Or, if you're a Spotify person, make sure you follow us at Gatsby Fridays.
Follow us on Instagram for exclusive content like Alex making this week's drink on our Insta stories throughout the week.
Stay with us on our next episode. We continue our series, Pop Culture Legacy.
This is Gatsby Fridays.